All right, welcome back, everybody. 18 minutes before 7. Let's turn our attention to the revised budget speech that Finance Minister Tito Mboweni will present today, or as it's, I think, more known commonly as the supplementary budget. That's what people are calling it. It comes on the back of yet another increase in the country's unemployment rate for the first quarter of the year. Statistics South Africa yesterday said the unemployment rate increased to 30.1% in the first quarter of this year. That's up from 29.1% in the fourth quarter of 2019. So the first quarter unemployment really does not reflect the full extent of the lockdown, which will only be clearer when second quarter statistics are released. This all amidst a revised budget that many analysts say is a make or break for the economy. Our Labour lawyer, Rehana Parker, is joining us now to unpack what to expect and other issues. We're also hoping to be joined by public policy analyst Tito Mboweni. We're trying to just secure the line with him, and he'll join us in the middle of the conversation, we hope. But in the meantime, Rehana, great to have you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hello, good morning, and good morning to the listeners as well, especially from a cold Cape Town.
Oh, good. Yeah, I know. I think it's cold all over the place, but I can imagine you've got that cold front coming in as well. Let's hope that the cold weather is not, well, actually, no. I don't think we can hope for anything. It's going to be a cold budget. That goes without saying. We're not in a good space, are we?
Absolutely, and I'm not expecting any miracles. Whatever packages will be made available certainly will not be sufficient to quell the financial impact on business. And if one looks, for example, at the figures that have come out for the first quarter, listeners need to be made aware that the first quarter reflects figures not as at today. It reflects the unemployment rate as at the first quarter up to and including March. So that takes us to pre-lockdown, and that figure, as you correctly said, it was reflected as 30.1%. In the last quarter of 2019, that figure was 29.1%. Now, what is important to note of those figures is that the unemployment rate, and one has to analyze the differences between 2010 and 2020. So in 2010, 4.6 million people were unemployed. And of course, now in 2020, in the first quarter, we're looking at 7.1 million people. Now, it is without any doubt, and nobody will disagree, that figure of 30.1% is certainly not the figure which we will be looking at today. Yeah. I'm expecting the results to come out for the second quarter by the end of June, because that is when it should be made available, probably in the region of 70%. Some are saying 69%, others are saying 70%. Others are saying it could be anywhere between 80 and 82%. Wow. However, what is important and what is concerning to me specifically is the unemployment rate for young people. And here I'm referring to the age groups 16 to 24. The figure sits at a shocking 59%. Now, that reflects roughly 10.3 million young South Africans. And the age group 25 to 34, the figure is 37.3%. Now, that is more, however, than the age group 45 to 54. So those figures are shocking. But what for me as a woman is even more shocking is the figures that come out for the unemployment rate for women, and especially Black African women. The figure sits at still over 30%. Now, that is shockingly high. And if we understand what is happening in terms of gender-based violence and the effects of lockdown on women, then women who find themselves further locked down in a financial dependent relationship, which means that for women in an abusive relationship will find themselves more strapped in terms of being unemployed and dependent on the very spouse that is causing them the abuse. So for me, that is a major concern and is something which I am hoping that our minister in the supplementary budget will address today. Now, fair enough. the last report we had was in February. What one expected out of lockdown was a frequent, updated report rather than wait for 4 months to be presented with a supplementary budget. The figures on unemployment was already shocking pre-lockdown. It was expected to rise. There's no question about that.
All right, Rehana, I think you've given us a lot to think about there. I know we've got TK. I think he's now with us on the line. TK, good morning to you.
Good morning, Leanne.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm glad that we've got you on here. Rehana's saying quite a few things, which I'm glad the camera wasn't on my face because there was that shock look that was coming up all the time with my mouth dropping. Expectations of unemployment to be sitting at between 69 and 70% when we report for the second quarter. This is dramatic. These numbers are really dramatic. Obviously, as we keep saying, that the figures that were released now for the first quarter are no way reflecting what COVID-19 has done. So, with this in mind and with everything that Rehana has said to us, give us your views. Where are we at? How can what we're going to hear this afternoon assist this in any way?
Well, I'd look at it in 3 ways because I really was thinking about the question last night. And the first one I look at is, this is a historical problem. This has not sprung upon us. And I think we must always keep that in mind, that this has been for the last decade. If you read Treasury's report, one of the Treasury reports from last year, they make mention of the fact that, look, for the last decade, South Africa has not been growing. And part of this growth has been what I think Ms. Khan was speaking about, namely the unemployment rise. And secondly, it's the key question of where are we going to find growth? And I think that this has always been, for me, the major problem. That we're good at highlighting the problem, which is unemployment, poor wheat, the fact that the economy is not growing. But what's been lacking is, where are we going to find growth? And I always say, look, we have to look at our counterparts, your Indias and your other countries, and Brazil. And it's a common problem. But what we're finding in South Africa for the last decade is we're not investing in the right things where we can potentially find growth. We've basically lost the whole decade in reforming the education system and economic policy. So that was one of the things we should have done 10 years ago. And also, and I think the third one is probably going to be the most painful one for everyone else, is when government sometimes thinks growth, unfortunately, going to think, where can we tax people more? And already, I think we're quite heavily taxed if you just, and I quote unquote, the middle class person. So for me, these are the three worries when I think about the budget for today, is that, look, we have to look at it within the historical thing. We've not made the right decisions. That's just basically one. And two, where decisions should have been made in terms of public policy, they really have not been made. And three, government has been a bit unimaginative in the fact that they'll simply just go for tax hikes, which is not really going to solve the bigger historical problem. And maybe then I'll just probably add a fourth thing, which is to say, we know that there's a problem. We cannot maybe ignore that. And we know that COVID is basically going to just blow the roof off the problem. But we really need to start thinking to say, listen, this crisis is a crisis, but what can we really gain from this crisis for the next 10 years? And that's what I want to hear in this budget, to say, listen, government will not come here and say, listen, things are going to be better next year. There's no government in the world that can basically promise that. But what they should be saying to us is that, listen, unlike previous times, from I cite 2008 when we had the world global recession, they need to come and say, listen, what we're going to present here is all honesty, which says that we need to look for the next 10 years on how to reform this. And it's unfortunate, and they're going to have to apologize and say, listen, we've not done our job in terms of due diligence for the last decade. But for going into 2031, that's where we really need to start thinking about it. And then they're going to have to explain to us things like state-owned entities. I, for one, am a fan of state-owned entities, but I want efficient ones. Meaning they need to say, listen, which ones are we going to keep for the next decade? And we have to remember that the mantra behind what a state-owned entity was about when they first came about in the National Party is you're using them to basically because the private sector cannot readily absorb everyone. You're using an entity which comes from the state, and you're saying, listen, we're actually making a bet that in the next few years or decades, the state-owned entity will actually play a major role in the economy. So we probably need to think about new state-owned entities which say, listen, how can we quickly get people in, especially young people and women, as your guest has said, into issues such as light manufacturing, into ICT type of jobs? And how can we also create ICTs which are ready to actually go into the continent and create new markets for them. It cannot be that we simply are going to put money into SA Airways and the like and say, listen, well, because there are jobs there, I think we need a bigger job thinking, which is to say, can we create a state-owned entity which is internationally competitive and which is actually tapping into a market which people are going to need? And we're seeing that the good thing about COVID is that it's actually highlighted to us where the next growth industries are coming from. So we need to actually reform government totally to say we need state-owned entities that are really in line with what the market's going to want. And I think that is probably the one thing I really am hoping that will come out from this budget, which is to say we're going to reform government in line with the weaknesses we've had in the past, and to also say, listen, this is what the international economy is saying, there's going to be growth, so let's align ourselves into that.
I think, we can always dream of an apology coming up, but I don't think that that's going to happen. I'm not sure that Minister Mboweni is going to stand up and apologize for the fact that we as a country haven't grown for the last decade, that the unemployment levels were already soaring before COVID-19 came in. And now what's happened is we've seen an acceleration through the roof. I mean, we've even seen this budget being leaked, whether it's the actual budget or not. And so, I mean, most of us have got the figures in front of us that are possibly going to be read out today. And these numbers are devastating. I mean, I don't know if it's a matter of lightening the blow before it's announced this afternoon, or it was a really big mistake to have released this. I'm not too sure. But I mean, just looking at some of the things that we could possibly expect is that Treasury's projecting a contraction between 5.4% and 16.1%. So hopefully that will be updated today. Job losses between 630,000 and 1.8 million for South Africans. Negative growth. Budget deficits to climb to 14%, up from 6.8% in February. There's a bleak picture that we're going to be presented with. But as you say, it's the plans. It's the plans to grow this economy. Rehana, I mean, you obviously being a labour lawyer, where do we begin? Where do we begin to grow the South African economy? It's not a question that we've been asking only now because of COVID-19. We've been asking this for a decade now of no growth in the country. Where should we start?
Thank you so much. Yes, I have to agree with what TK has said in terms of that which has not been working for the last 10 years surely should be the trigger. It took lockdown to get us to a position of waking up to the real stark reality of many fault lines. Unemployment is but one of it. Inequality is another, and poverty is another. However, unless the minister is going to come up with a reformative policy, and that which is innovative, and that which in fact makes business able to reinvent itself, that is where the solutions are. And again, from a gender perspective, packages must be made available targeted for women. Otherwise, the figures so far as women are concerned are going to be even a greater shock. So that is what I'm expecting to hear from the budget for me. And speaking as a voice for women, as an employer, yes, the job losses are already felt. And here comes the other difficulty that I have. The Unemployment Insurance Fund is already aware of the mass and scale of claims that are being made. Make those figures available so that the private sector as well as government can wake up to the stark reality which we are going to be faced. And let's forge very strong public and private partnerships to ensure that carries through. And then, yes, look at what the international markets are doing. The international markets, we are only producing our first supplementary budget report. I would call it a lockdown budget report, not a supplementary report. But governments in other countries are already on to its fourth budget report. So we really need to look at how we do our business in terms of reforming and policies at government level. Then we can go deeper down into the economic issues. I'm not an economist, but we cannot tax the citizens and people of South Africa any further. So the VAT is nowhere to go because that would be a huge outcry. The tax revenue streams, which the government is dependent on, is also fast dwindled because of the COVID situation. The only possible areas might be wealth tax, but that we also know will attract a huge outrage. I've been a firm, I hold a very firm view when it comes to estate planning, that in the estate planning, estate duty payable to SARS on estates which are in excess of 3.5 million rand, that threshold should have been raised long ago, and increase a sliding scale tax on those who own, for example, assets worth 5 million rand and more, and then slide it in as one progresses up that asset value scale.
Yeah.
And then secondly, for me, the other important issue with regard to which I have a huge problem with is the wage bill. And we know that is where the big spend is. Government, and I'm hoping Minister Mboweni is going to respond very positively as to whether there will be any offerings from the huge public sector wage bill.
Yeah.
Again, that would be met with a huge outcry.
Yeah.
And then last but sorry, yes.
Yeah. No, I know, Rehana, thank you. I mean, these are important aspects. We're just running into a bit of time problems now because, TK, I want to bring you in here. We talk to, Rehana's brought up very, very important issues for what we can expect today. I mean, this wage bill is a big sticking point. Already, if we look back at the original budget in February, he spoke to cutting that bill by 160.2 billion rand over 3 years. And this caused a huge uproar from the unions. And, I mean, this is now something he needs to address in this budget. So that's the one thing I'd like you to address there. The other thing is the tax collection. I mean, we've already been warned that tax revenue is going to go down by at least over 280 billion rand this year. And this is also because of people earning less, also because of the cigarette ban and not selling cigarettes, and also the alcohol. So this has played a major, major role, which is going to lead to South Africa possibly having to even borrow more money, whereas we've already gone out. We saw that we got money from the Development Bank, about I'm not sure, you'll remind us of that figure, about 100 billion or so. But I mean, these are big things that we are now opening ourselves up to. Perhaps you want to wrap up with a few of those issues.
Yes, on the issue of the wage bill, I think we need a holistic view, because I know people always just go easily for your employees, but one of the things which I think we're just hemorrhaging money on unnecessarily is the fact that we're running two capital cities where people work between Cape Town and Pretoria. That's one of the things that really should have been addressed a long time ago. And two, on the issue of the wage bill, I think, as I said, we need to actually think, what type of civil servants do we need, and are we getting basically, are we getting value for what we're investing in? And I think once we start looking at it in terms of value and investment for the future, I think then we can start saying which of these types of employees which we currently have can we start dwindling away from. I'm not one advocating that you simply just take jobs away, but I think if you negotiate with certain jobs which we're not going to need in the next 10 years in the civil service, it will be a bit easier. And government really needs to take the lead. And I think they need to take the lead by firstly dwindling themselves. We have far too, I've always said this point, we have a government in terms of ministries and deputy ministers and the add-ons, which is far too big. So that I think that needs to be the first step that they need to do. And as you're saying, secondly, is that the issue of SARS and tax collection. Again, this is where it becomes a bit hard, because it's not as though, and I always say that South Africans do pay tax. It's not as though we don't want to pay tax. But sometimes people become very angry to say, listen, I'm paying tax, but I'm not getting the value I'm seeing in the tax I'm paying. And now that people are going through their own crisis, I think they're going to have to be a bit lenient in how this goes. I know leniency doesn't quite work well when you're trying to run a country, but if people cannot afford to literally pay taxes, what's the point in putting them in further distress? And I think you've touched on the really great issue, which is the last one, which is the issue of the loan amounts we're getting from overseas institutions like the IMF and the World Bank and other institutions. The worry is that we're basically borrowing for purposes of spending, not in growth sectors, but for the purposes of serving what would say is our debt. And if you run a household, you're actually warned about this from your financial advisor, which is to say you simply cannot borrow credit for purposes of lifestyle. And I think that's what we're kind of doing. And the problem is going to be, like you're saying, it's going to catch up with us. So I think before they actually went out for getting this money, we really should have thought very hard about, yes, we're going to get this money. It's going to plug in a few of the gaps. But what can we really use this money for? Because other countries that have used the World Bank and IMF money, and I always cite China, is that you need to put it into things that have got growth. To simply put it into paying wages is very counterintuitive, because it catches up with you later on. And I think that's always been the problem I have with some of what government does, is that they're not very good at thinking about the long term. And now it's catching up with us. I think I'm very worried about us having to go outside. And I think we also have to put pressure, just platforms such as yours, where we actually demand, thinking about the future. Because I know we are in a dire situation, but, we are going to inherit this problem going forward. And I think we need to put pressure on the government to have to account for the monies they get from overseas, to say, where are you going to put this into possible growth areas? And if you're not going to put it into possible growth areas, maybe borrowing is not the right way for you.
All right, we've got to leave it there. Thank you, both of you, for your views on this particular issue. And it's a massive issue that we all got to do that. Rehana, who, of course, is a Labour lawyer joining us from Cape Town, TK Poor, political analyst as well, talking to us about many issues that are affecting South Africa's economy, unemployment, and the budget that will be coming up this afternoon, the supplementary budget that our Finance Minister will be announcing. But right now, let's get you into the news bulletin.